All right. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the second annual Paul McCarthy Memorial Lecture. I'm Ryan Orgera, and I'm the CEO of the Sanibel-Captiva Conservation Foundation. And SCCF is dedicated to the conservation of coastal habitats and aquatic resources on Sanibel and Captiva in our surrounding watershed. This annual lecture series was conceived by the Bowler Family Foundation, which underwrites the fees and expenses as a way to honor their dear family friend, Paul McCarthy. Paul was an acclaimed environmentalist, business leader, attorney, and world traveler. He would have turned 67 yesterday had he not passed away on August 2016 on his beloved Captiva Island. Best known here on the island as the founder of Captiva Cruises, Paul was born and raised in Boston, where he graduated from St. Gregory's Grammar School and the Boston Latin School. He earned an undergraduate from Stonehill College, as well as an MBA and law degree from the University of Notre Dame, and a Master's of Public Administration from the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard University. Originally a corporate attorney in Chicago, Paul made a career change into the boat and tourism business that inspired the first architectural tours of Chicago from the water. Launching Chicago from the Lake, Paul embraced the boating, special events, and hospitality business full-time. Winter weather led him to Florida, where he founded Captiva Cruises in 1986 to craft excursions to the nearby waterways and barrier islands. And in 1991, Paul moved to Captiva full-time, built McCarthy's Marina, and became a leader in the community, serving on the boards of SCCF, the Sandcap Chamber of Commerce, Captiva Island Historical Society, and the Captiva Civic Association. Beloved by his crew members, friends, and island neighbors, Paul left a rich, full legacy of stewardship and ecotourism embodied in Captiva Cruises to respect and appreciate the natural beauty of Southwest Florida. Though I didn't have the privilege of knowing Paul, I am very sure that he would have been thrilled to have her Deepness, Dr. Sylvia Earle, here with us on our islands to speak this evening. Now, our esteemed speaker. This is one of those times in my life where I feel truly humbled and deeply grateful. Sylvia Earle's life work is a wonder of the world. There have been many extraordinary scientists in human history. You know many of them. But there have been fewer figures who have integrated science into society to convey an intricate topic to audiences of varied backgrounds, to bring folks along on an emotional journey through a subject is where Sylvia Earle shines. Through passion and ability, she has succeeded in bringing millions along on journeys through her beloved oceans, creating lasting connections to our natural world. Sylvia isn't the first explorer scientist to show us the wonders of the ocean, but I would argue that she is the first to truly show us the ocean through her unique blend of science and empathy. Jacques Cousteau brought the ocean into our living rooms. His early explorations with open circuit scuba, which he invented with Emile Gagnon, was the first time Americans became part of an alien, arcane place that was full of wonder. In my estimation, where Sylvia took the baton from Cousteau and others is marked most keenly by her deep personal connection to nature and her ability to share her innate love of sea life. She is an accomplished, trailblazing scientist, but for me, her legacy is also her ability to both convey and foster empathy for the ocean and its stunning arrays of life. Sylvia has led more than 100 expeditions, including the first team of women aquanauts to inhabit an underwater lab. She has logged more than 7,000 hours underwater, including a 1979 descent to an ocean floor depth never before reached by humans. She served as the chief scientist at the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. She is a National Geographic Explorer and founder of the nonprofit Mission Blue. She has lectured in over 90 countries and authored more than 200 publications. And on a personal note, Sylvia and I spent formative years in Cape Hayes, Florida, only 30 miles north of where we sit. She is the resident director of Cape Hayes Laboratory, the progenitor of Mote Marine Laboratory, and me at my childhood best friend's house, largely watching TV. These are pretty similar experiences. So whether or not you fully realize it, You are about to witness one of those figures history records as an extraordinary force for good. For me, she belongs in the conservation ranks of Rachel Carson, John Muir, or Theodore Roosevelt. Her gift to us all is a better, more hopeful world, one in which we all learn to fight for the greatest wilderness on our planet. So please join me in welcoming the soundtrack to our planet's Blue Heart, Dr. Sylvia Earle. I don't know what's happening.
Thank you, Ryan, for that generous introduction. Oh, so much to live up to or down to, depending on your perspective. What a pleasure it is for me to be here in a place that I have visited all too infrequently over the years that I have called Florida home. I mean, I'm a Jersey girl. I started out, I didn't have anything to do with it, but my parents decided to come south and settled up in Pinellas County, Dunedin, and my earliest years of splashing around in the ocean really were started in around Clearwater. I say I went to Clearwater High School when Clearwater had clear water. And you know, anyone who's lived in Florida for very long know that we are witnessing a time of unprecedented change. And those of us who've been around longer than some others have seen more change than some of the rest. But I have a little book on my shelf that I treasure, written by a botanist, John Kunkel Small. He lived in the early part of the 20th century, and in 1922 wrote a book called From Eden to Sahara, referring to Florida. The Florida that he knew was Eden when he was a boy, but he watched the change. Well, when I came to Florida in the late 1940s, I thought I had arrived in Eden. So it's a matter of shifting baselines, a term that scientists are increasingly using, that what you know as a kid is the way you think the world has kind of always been. That's your starting point. But think of the acceleration of change just since the middle of the 20th century. Or none of us are able to remember the beginning of the Industrial Revolution 200 plus years ago, when 1800, finally, our population had reached 1 billion people. Imagine, it was in 1500, 500 years ago, when there were only 500 million people on Earth. Now, we're inching toward 8 billion, and most of them, I think, are on the highways here in Florida. I experienced some of that last night as I drove down from where my parents settled up in Dunedin. I still have that place and cherish it as a little speck of green in the midst of a whole lot of cement. I really want to salute you, gathered here, for what I have witnessed today, your actions to save what can be saved of this part of the planet that is still in pretty good shape, and taking action to restore what's possible with the oyster restorations, the mangroves, giving nature a break, anything that can be done to embrace what remains of the distillation of what's taken 4.5 billion years to kind of get just right for us, and 4.5 decades to unravel much of the gift that we have from the past. So there's a lot of bad news I could talk about, and I'll talk about a little bit of it, but mostly I want to celebrate the fact that we are here at a time when, as never before, we have the power of understanding what our predecessors could not. Even Einstein, who really smart individual, but he had never had the opportunity to see what children of today take for granted. Of course we can see what Earth looks like from space. Astronauts have been up in the sky. Hundreds of people have been up there in the space shuttle looking back on us. But it's such a new view, one that none of our predecessors prior to the middle of the 20th century, well, they might imagine it, but to actually know, that's what we look like, this little blue miracle against the infinity of a lifeless universe. Well, maybe there's life out there somewhere else, but not human civilization, all the things that we care about. No cypress trees, no oysters, no crabs, no whatever it is that we think of as life on Earth. I am just so thrilled to have come along at this point in time, and everyone should feel the joy of the opportunity that we have to reverse what we have all witnessed, which is a decline of the systems that have taken so long to put into place, and how quickly, armed with partly our numbers, but also with the technology that both gives us the gift of knowing, takes us high in the sky, but also has resulted in a downside. It's only right about now that we've begun to truly account for the cost of our prosperity and to realize we've got to make peace with nature. We have to find a place for ourselves within the natural systems that make our existence possible. And what better gift than that? To have all of our predecessors learning, and passing the knowledge along. We don't have to start inventing the alphabet or numbers or making paper or making cameras or seats we sit on. Somebody figured that out and passed it along. And now we have this incredible opportunity. We know what could not be known before, that there are limits to what we can do to the natural world and get away with it. We've gotten away with a lot because we can still breathe. And water still magically falls out of the sky sort of at the right time of the year. The temperature of the planet is still, we can still live here, but we also can see by using the knowledge that has been gained to project the future and to know that we have choices. We can continue with the same patterns that our predecessors, going back thousands, tens of thousands of years, consuming nature to foster our prosperity, eating our neighbors, all the wildlife, and then learning how to grow things. And then just still, even now, when we know that there are limits, the knowledge is there, we continue inexorably to consume, but somewhere along the line, why not right now, figure out, we have to change the habits that we have become accustomed to. If we are going to succeed, we have to think differently about the cost and to respect nature as never before. And I'm speaking to an audience, you know these things because you're doing the right things. I'm thrilled to see how much green still exists on Sanibel-Captiva, not because, it's an accident. It's because people such as you and those who agree that we have to protect nature as if our lives depend on it. because they do. Oh, well, now we know. And as a kid scientist, an oceanographer, while I was still a graduate student, in this time of being a witness, an observer, seeing the world when it was a very different place than it is today, I had a chance to go on a big boat to the Indian Ocean. I had not been west of the Mississippi, and I got to go to the Indian Ocean as a scientist. It was such an exhilarating experience for me. I had 2 small children at the time. I had to leave them in the care of my parents and then husband. They were 2 and 4 years old. It was a scary thing. And I wouldn't have gone at all, except that the person who was supposed to be the botanist on the expedition at the last minute could not go. And I was asked, would you please take his place? His place. The idea that as a woman, I would be welcome on a ship with 70 men. Nobody thought about it until it was almost too late to turn back. And people wonder if in fact, the reporter in Mombasa, when we arrived there, did an interview for the 12 scientists who were aboard among all the crew. He asked, so what are you going to do? And we poured our hearts out about the explorations that we had hoped to achieve. But the headline the next day, Sylvia sails away with 70 men. But she expects no problems. And the problems we all shared were mainly, we're up there, you see, over on the surface of the ocean. The average depth of the ocean is 2.5 miles. Our job was to explore the ocean, and we had the ability to only go a little bit deep. I mean, a little bit. We had scuba, some of the first scuba tanks that were apparatus that made it possible to explore in the water. Otherwise, we had the standard oceanographic equipment. We had nets, we had hooks, we had dredges, we had those things that scientists had been using for quite a long time, dragging the ocean floor, killing things, looking at their dead bodies. Going into the ocean, to actually see these creatures on their own terms was transformative. And it wasn't long before this that I actually got acquainted with scuba. It was here in Florida. I was taking a class at Florida State University as an undergraduate, living at Alligator Harbor. And 2 of the first tanks and regulators and all that came into the country were available to us. I had 2 words of instruction: breathe naturally. I did. And I and those who learned diving in the early days survived. We learned from our mistakes and the mistakes of others. But magically, we have emerged again as witnesses, not just from the surface, but by actually getting into the ocean. So I'm sad to say that my mother didn't take the plunge until she was 81. If she were here now, she would say, do not wait until you are 81. But if you are, it's not too late. Go out there, get down there, or splash around with a mask and fins at least, but go enjoy your blue backyard. And I know many of you, maybe all of you, have done so. It's a gift to be able to go get up close and personal with a fish other than on your plate, to see them as fellow citizens of this mostly blue planet. And I do love diving, but I'm always frustrated by how deep you can go, not very far, and how long you can stay, not very long. And the idea of living underwater captured my imagination when an opportunity came along in 1969, the same year that the first footprints were being put on the moon. It was an application that was requested for those who wanted to see what it was like to live underwater, to be an aquanaut, at the same time that heroic humans were going high in the sky as astronauts. It was it was a natural thing for me to say, okay, I'll apply. I didn't know that they didn't expect women to apply. Just like going on the big boat with 70 men. I ask sometimes guys, hey, if you had to go to the ocean at sea for 6 weeks with 70 women, would that be a problem? Most of them just say, no, that would be great. You know? So the idea of living underwater with your fellow scientists, I thought that would be no problem. But to the powers that be in Washington, at the Smithsonian Institution, with the Department of Interior, with the Navy, that was a problem. With NASA at the time, there were no women astronauts until 15 years later. But the head of the program, who lives here in Florida, James Miller, had a good relationship with his mother and with his wife, and he had a couple of daughters. His reaction when they said, shall there or shall there not be women, was, well, half the fish are female. I guess we could put up with a few women. So they did. And we had this amazing time of, they wouldn't let men and women live together, but they made a women's team, of course, and we did have a great time. And it was a few years later, I had a chance to try another form of living underwater. And then another. I've done it now 10 times. This was the most recent time in the Florida Keys in the Aquarius underwater laboratory that is now privately supported. The US government gave up the idea of having underwater laboratories for people to get to know the ocean. They haven't given up living in space, but living underwater, that's a different thing. And men and women can live underwater as well as in space, and we can ride on airplanes together and get into cars together and sit here in this room together. We are the same species after all. And working together and using technologies that have come about just, go back, see. I want to show you what appeared to be a moment of zen on the Jon Stewart show when I could be underwater with a helmet speaking to my pals on the surface. To go deeper and stay long, it's necessary, just as astronauts going up in the sky, to package yourself in an environment that works for us. So in the sky, way up in space, it's the lack of pressure that's a problem. Going deep in the ocean, it's the increased pressure. And of course, you can't breathe whether you're up in space or down deep in the sea unless you take your life support system along with you. So I've had the great pleasure over the years of working with engineers to solve that problem. How do we go deep? How do we package ourselves so that we can explore the ocean with a gift of time and depth? Currently, we have access to the deepest parts of the ocean. Well, a few people have. There are only on 3 occasions that people have had successful descents to the deepest part of the ocean. One-way trips are really easy. It's going down and, being able to come back. The first time was 9 years before the first footprints on the moon, 1960, when 2 guys went in the Trieste submersible 7 miles down and back. And 2012, 52 years later, it was Jim Cameron, who's better known for making films like Avatar and Titanic, who's also a fellow explorer in residence at the National Geographic, who used his own resources. Again, so much good happens with private money being invested in strategic ways. And his dream as an explorer was to go to the deepest part of the ocean and bring back information, not just bounce down and say, woohoo, look what I've done. I climbed Mount Everest. I mean, that was important to do, but to go to the deepest place and come back verifying there is life all the way from the surface to the greatest depths, and to be able to share the view with the world. That has been a powerful motivation. Most recently, just earlier this year, another explorer, again, using his own resources. He didn't build the submarine the way Jim Cameron did. He got somebody else to do it, but he used it. I mean, astronauts don't build their spacecraft, they just get in them, fly off into the skies above. But in any case, we are at the edge of the greatest era of exploring this planet ever, because we are beginning to gain access to where most of life on Earth lives, most of it in the dark, most of it in cold water, most of it under high pressure, not friendly to us, but friendly for all the creatures who live there. That is home. And to have the joy of having fingerprints on a little submersible that I helped make happen was really great. But this kind of sub with a clear sphere, so far, these little subs that you can get into and drive yourself, so easy to drive, even a scientist can do it. You can go, 1,000 meters, which is great. It's a start. It's half a mile. It's where William Beebe and Otis Barton were able to go, not in a clear sphere, but in a little steel ball with a window in it before I was born in the 1930s. And to be able to do that again, but armed with new technologies, with cameras, with manipulator arms, with sampling devices, with the ability to record what you see and bring back the information, well, Beebe would be thrilled to do that. And just 3 years ago, I had an opportunity to go out into the Gulf of Mexico, down to some of those deep saline lakes that are so salty that they never mix with the water above. There are salt mountains in the northern Gulf of Mexico that leak highly saline water into the ocean. And because it's heavier than the surrounding water, it accumulates in big pools. I mean, there are dozens of these saline lakes, more than 1,000 feet beneath the surface. And to be able to go down there and see a lake within the ocean, rimmed with mussels and with creatures that some of them can tolerate that highly saline water. Most creatures don't. We've seen fish. Actually, we witnessed this, and you can see glimpses of this too if you see the BBC's Blue Planet 2, where we took these little submarines down, and fish, thinking that it was okay to keep going, get into this totally lethal lake. They get in there and then they die. And for the creatures who can tolerate it, like some of the eels, they love it when they have an instant banquet. So at National Geographic, going back to 1998, for 5 years, supported, along with a foundation based in California, the Richard and Rhoda Goldman Foundation, and with the agency where I was chief scientist for a while, NOAA, provided ships and personnel. We had a series of expeditions around the coastline of this country. We called it the Sustainable Seas Expeditions. And it was such fun to be able to enlist divers, to enlist scientists and CEOs and people in not just industry and education and science, but we had people who were communicators, certainly the National Geographic, to get in these little submarines, learn how to drive them. We had more than 50 individuals who became submarine pilots. You couldn't do that with a spacecraft as easily as we got the inner spacecraft access, and went around to the places that have been marked with distinction as marine sanctuaries. Now, you can still kill fish in marine sanctuaries, but it's a step in the right direction to get people to think about protecting the land has a counterpart in the ocean. We only, starting in the 1970s, 100 years after the first global exploration of the ocean, the Challenger expedition, in Australia and the United States started to wise up about the need to specifically protect critical areas of the ocean, breeding areas, feeding areas, places that were in really good condition and should be left in good condition as a source of renewal for places that had been damaged. You get it here, but go back a few years, nobody got it at all. We thought the ocean was too big to fail, that the ocean was infinite in its capacity to yield whatever we wanted to take out of it, and that we could use the ocean to dump anything that we wanted to put into it. The Sustainable Seas expeditions, starting in 1998, for 5 years, we got kids, we got teachers, we had just so much joy going around the country having these occasions where we gathered the community together and gave talks and then picked up our little submarine and ships and went on to the next destination. And so that was, in a sense, the beginning of the idea of what has emerged now. We'll talk a bit more about the idea of having hope spots, not just in this country, but around the world. The idea of giving back to the ocean that gives us basically life itself, and not knowing until right about now that the ocean could ever get into trouble. But now we know the ocean is in trouble, therefore we're in trouble. So it's not just giving back to the fish, it's protecting our own security, our own existence, our own health and well-being. So that was great, going back a few years, and more little submarines have come along since then. We were basically the test pilots for the little subs that we used back in the early 1990s. Now they're around the world. It's an idea that's catching on. This little submarine lives, for the most part, out at Cocos Island in Costa Rica. And you can go out there as a visitor or as a scientist and, have access to, in this case, 500 meters. It's a good start. But again, I feel like the old days of diving. We're here, we can get here, but we need to go all the way to the deepest part of the ocean. We need to explore the ocean. The ocean is not just the top nor the bottom, it's all that good stuff in the middle. And even though we know a fair amount about the configuration of the ocean floor, when I was at NOAA as chief scientist, one of our missions there was to map the ocean. And the way we were going, at the speed we were going then, in the early 1990s, we figured it would take about 150 years to get reasonably good maps of the ocean floor. Right now, only about 10% of the sea floor has been mapped with the same kind of accuracy that we take for granted for the moon, Mars, Jupiter, or the state of Florida above water. What about the state of Florida below? I mean, we're doing better in Florida than in most parts of the world in knowing the configuration of the sea floor out there, but we still have a long way to go. But I'm happy to report, next 10 years, there's this program internationally dedicated using new technologies. They figure by 2030, we'll have a reasonably good map of the entire ocean floor. Like, woohoo, what have we been waiting for? We know how to destroy the ocean before we even have a map of what's there, let alone an inventory of who lives there. From starting 2000 to 2010, another 10-year little bite of time, the Census of Marine Life, engaging scientists all over the world and citizen scientists, individuals like birdwatchers who brought in information about what kinds of creatures live where, with photographs, with data, going back in the old books and museums, assessing what did live on the planet, going back as far as we could reach, and then trying to figure out the way we're going, what's going to be around in the next 10, 50, 100 years. A really great exercise. But again, they were thwarted by not even knowing where in the ocean we are because we lack a map of the ocean floor. Getting back to the same place in the ocean, any of you sailors out there know. Now you just look at your GPS, go back 50 years. Where are we really? I mean, can you see a landmark on the shore know kind of where you are, look at the stars. Well, we can still do that, but getting lost is no longer an option as long as you've got this electronic connection to the satellites. That's cause for hope. Cause for hope that these new systems are coming along, and I'm doing my best working with engineers now to make it easy for people. Kids, we need to get kids out there 1,000 meters, or why not 7 miles down, to see the world from the inside out. I hope that within 10 years, we will be able to say to anybody in this room, do you want to go for a ride? Let's go, come on. Getting into a cab is so easy, or Uber, or whatever you ride, or your own family car, or getting on an airplane, getting onto a boat. But the number of options we currently have to go deep, way, way too limited. But it's going to happen. It's irresistible. Because, why? Because we are all sea creatures, in a way. No ocean, no us. We need the ocean. And the ocean is in trouble. We have to go figure out what the problems are. We have to figure out what the solutions are. We have to get to know our aquatic neighbors. And we have the opportunity to build on what we now know and take it in critical next steps further. So, I know plankton in this part of the world, known roughly as the red tide or other problems, where the creatures that are just vital for our existence, that have been generating oxygen over not just hundreds of millions, but over billions of years, before there were multicellular creatures at all. There were little guys out in the ocean, blue-green algae, single-celled individuals that transformed the planet into a hospitable place. Well, bacteria and archaea and the plankton generally respond to changes rather quickly. We are now changing the chemistry of the planet, and therefore the composition of what's out there in the plankton responds rather quickly. If you had more nitrogen, nitrates, if you had more phosphates, if you deplete the oxygen, some critters say, it's just right for me. They've been lurking there in small numbers, but suddenly they can explode in numbers. Or you change almost anything, and it's good news for some, bad news for others. And it can happen quickly when your life cycle can be replicated in a matter of hours or days. Not like us, we have to wait a long time before we get, the next generation coming along. But anyway, getting to know the nature of life in the ocean, it's our gift. I mean, there was a scientist at MIT, a woman scientist, Penny Chisholm, who discovered a creature that is responsible for generating on the order of 20% of the oxygen in the atmosphere, Prochlorococcus. Kids would have no problem learning Prochlorococcus, and kids do learn about Prochlorococcus, but most people have never heard of Prochlorococcus, even though, thank you, we can breathe. Prochlorococcus, you can say it, it's all right. We didn't know it existed until 1986. Gaw, what else don't we know that's out there? And diatoms, these beautiful creatures that have shaped the atmosphere in ways favorable to us, and to zooplankton, the little animals at larval stages or when they're grown-ups. They rely on those tiny little green things and blue-green things. I just love that we are at a time when microscopes exist as well as telescopes, that we have the capacity to be explorers in the small world around us, and to get this knowledge that we're a part of this amazing living planet, and our existence really is linked directly to all these other creatures. It's the carbon cycle, it's the nitrogen cycle, it's the water cycle, it's the oxygen cycle. It's the cycles that we are right in the thick of it. And we, not over hundreds of millions of years, but in decades, we have managed to change the nature of nature. It's a scary thought, but it's also an empowering thought. Because if we are the agents of change, we know how and why we've affected the nature of life on Earth, then we can do what we can in a magnified way, far better than any of our predecessors, because they didn't know what we know. We have, and I tell kids how lucky they are, because they've got superpowers, armed with knowledge. That is the most powerful thing of all. Imagine if we didn't know about climate change. Imagine if we didn't know that what we do, what we put into the water, affects not just our backyard, but water has a way of connecting throughout an entire system. That's what here in Sanibel, here in laboratories, institutions around the world, diving into the problems and trying to figure out, okay, now we know what the problems are, how can we solve the problems? How can we change what we're doing that caused the problems, using our superpowers, to go in a different direction while there's still time? So I love diving into a food chain in the ocean. It's the chemistry of life in action. You can't see the little tiny Prochlorococcus and diatoms and all of that, but that's what the little fish are dining upon, and the zooplankton that is part of the system too. But, this is what keeps the chemistry of the ocean flowing. Big fish eat little fish, and little fish eat the smaller things, but everybody, can't imagine that this is big news, but it is big news now. Big creatures, medium-sized creatures, little creatures, all along the way, they all poop. They all put nutrients back into the system. I'm serious. Right now, I just came from Davos. I was there 2 weeks ago, listening to scientists convey to the serious economic forum gurus, whales are important because they put nutrients back into the system after they eat krill, but they also digest krill, and they put nutrients back that powers the phytoplankton that capture the carbon. Think climate change. So how do whales factor into climate change? Well, that was what I was hearing. It seems so obvious once you see it, but until you see it, it's still not in the equation. But of course, everybody poops. But why does it take until the 21st century before we relate the flocks of birds that once darkened the sky, leaving nutrients as they traveled, fertilizing the soil, creating an immensely rich soil that has become the farmlands that we have come to rely on? Now, the birds are mostly gone. There's still some, but not these rivers of birds in the sky. Think about passenger pigeons numbering in the billions, totally extinct within a century after they were first really used a bit for food. And then as our technologies and appetites increased, we eliminated them all. So what are we doing to creatures in the sea? Same kind of pattern. But we didn't know about the connection between the richness of the soil and birds, or didn't think about it anyway, going back 100 years. We can think about it in retrospect. We can also think about the future. We need these wild creatures. We need those connections to make a planet that works in our favor. And again, diving in, but getting in the water where you see everybody getting into the action, not just the dolphins and sharks, birds coming in from the top, tuna coming in from the side, having lunch, and doing what all these creatures do, fertilizing the water, and you're just a witness to it. Anyway, there's more than plankton in the water these days, as you know all too well. That, again, go back 50 years, most of this stuff didn't even exist, and now there are these claims that maybe by the middle of this century there'll be more plastic in the ocean than fish because we're taking more fish out and putting more plastic in. Use your imagination. You're out there swimming in trash. Most of you don't have to use your imagination if you've been out in the Gulf recently. The trash is there, and we are the witnesses to the consequences. This is not the Gulf of Mexico, but it could have been. This is a monk seal from Hawaii. Most people are not aware that until the 1950s, there were seals in the Gulf of Mexico. A cousin of the monk seal that lives in the Mediterranean, another species in Hawaii. I never got to see one, even though they were around on my watch. Any of you who were around before 1952, they were here on your watch too. And they just slipped away. The way the little Sanibel rodent, rat, fluffy little creature could slip away and nobody would notice, except maybe some of those who know and care about the existence of these incredible little innocent creatures, innocent of the way we think about rats. And there's a difference in various species, of course, but everyone has a place. Monk seals have a place. There are maybe 1,000 of them left now in Hawaii, maybe 200 left in the Mediterranean. In the Gulf of Mexico, 0. Although Ponce de Leon saw them, they were here, again, fishermen saw them in the early days in the 20th century. But our legacy includes now those of us who use Ziplocs, I'm guilty, or all other plastics. Our inheritance, our legacy is out there in the ocean. And we have a chance now to do something about it because we know of the problem. If we didn't know, that would be an even bigger problem. We thought the only good shark was a dead shark when I was a kid. Don't go into the ocean, there are man-eaters out there, but I went anyway. And then I thought, oh, man-eaters, I don't have to worry. And I met Eugenie Clark. She took me under her flipper when I was a student, and she has been a great ambassador for sharks, getting to show how incredibly, well, magnificent they are. They have a history that precedes us by hundreds of millions of years. 300 million years is roughly their time on Earth. And they are supreme masters of the ocean, of the planet mostly. And it's no wonder that when we see images like this, we think of them as fearsome and scary, and the only good one is perhaps a dead one. And we dare not go into the ocean because they're going to get us. But now we know what we could not know a few years ago. We don't have to worry about being eaten by sharks. Sharks have to worry about getting eaten by us. I mean, literally hundreds of millions of sharks are taken to serve the new appetite for shark fin soup. They're valuable as a commodity, but have you ever thought about the value of a live shark as compared to the value of a dead shark? Dead shark, we can put the numbers on that. And actually, in the little island country of Palau, the president, who's a diver and has come to really revere sharks, has put a different number to tourism. A single shark to the little island country of Palau is worth more than $1 million. And so you can sell one once dead for a few $100s, the fins from a shark. But we have to get our accounting straight. The ocean needs sharks, and we need the ocean. And for us here in Florida to still kill sharks for fun, or to kill sharks for food when their numbers have plummeted from when I was a kid to 90% being gone, or the Oceanic whitetip in the Gulf of Mexico, maybe 1% remain. They used to be the most common shark in the Gulf of Mexico, according to the records of those who were around a few decades ago. And then there are the tuna. There are a number of different kinds of tuna, all of them, sad for them, taste good to primates, to us. But they have also been in the ocean for far longer than we have been on the planet. They, like whales, like sharks, like all other things, are part of the nitrates and phosphates, the cycling of the chemistry of life in the ocean. You take out all these big predators, the sharks, the whales, the tunas, the swordfish, and you change the chemistry of the ocean, the way we change the chemistry of the land by eliminating the great herds of buffalo, or in Africa, the great migrations that, kept the soil turned over, kept nutrifying the soil. I mean, there were rhythms of nature that we're only now being able to put on the balance sheet about where we fit in and why we need to restore some of what is lost. We can't put all of it back. Besides, there wouldn't be room for us if we did. But we can work with nature, restore what we can, protect what remains of the systems and the creatures that are still in good shape, or those that are on their way out. When I was, again, going back to my chief scientist at NOAA days, a little piece of paper came across my desk because National Marine Fisheries is a part of NOAA. It said that bluefin tuna had declined by 90% since 1970. But no worries, we're going to figure out how many more we can take and still have them, sustainably extracted. And my reaction was, what? In 20 years, 90% have been removed, and you're trying to take them sustainably? My reaction at a fisheries council meeting was, are we trying to exterminate them? Because if so, great, we only have 10% left to go. And that was the last meeting they let me go to. And they started calling me the Sturgeon General because somebody had to speak for the fish. I mean, it was like common sense. I asked the little kid questions. Why are you doing this? Why? I mean, can't you see? And I still ask that. And it doesn't make me very popular among some fishermen, but other fishermen who do see what I've seen, what anybody can see, here's where the fish were, or you name it, stone crabs, lobsters, shrimp, clams, oysters, here's where they were, here's where they are. Why? Because of our appetite and also our lack of awareness about how we can take some but not destroy the habitats or take them to the point where they're going to have a hard time surviving, let alone have enough so that we can enjoy dining on them. And oh, by the way, maybe there are other ways that you can get to know fish other than on your plate. Getting like birds used to be, just something to eat. But we learned birds are beautiful. We have bird watchers with an economy based on birds alive that transcends killing songbirds as a short-term bite of something to eat. Oh, maybe you've been to fish markets around the world and see these creatures that are getting smaller, getting more uncommon. Some creatures that were common are now rare. Swordfish among them, tuna. Whales, we did it to whales. It took us a long time to sort of wake up to the value of whales as more than just pounds of meat and barrels of oil. But, we didn't know. We thought whales would keep coming and coming and coming, and only when we saw, really in the 20th century, that either we had to stop killing them or there wouldn't be any anymore. It was that close. We're down to, in some cases, a few hundred individuals, like the gray whales in California. But when you stop killing them, amazing things can happen. It doesn't guarantee that they will recover. The northern right whale in the Atlantic, along the coast of Georgia and on up, coming off the coast, the east coast of Florida, there are about 300. And it's been that way for a number of years. A few more than 300, a few less. They're kind of holding their own. But all it'll take is one catastrophe, one terrible storm at the critical time, or a food source, or some dastardly kind of pollution, and they get below that point. They keep hoping they'll start to get that critical number that increases. It happened to humans. Our numbers were really low at one point in history, but we finally caught on, and critical mass was reached, and now we're really very successful, biologically speaking. So now we have an increasing number of whales, and we are seeing the other way of accounting for them. It's a new day, a new time. If you had to choose to be born and want to make a difference in the world, you know, this would be the best time ever, I think, because we still have 10% of the sharks. And we still have 3% of the bluefin tuna in the Pacific and maybe 10% in the Atlantic. They're not all gone. Oysters in the Chesapeake Bay got down to 1%. And now people are doing what you're doing here, trying to put them back, give them a break. I mean, we're still eating oysters in Chesapeake Bay, and I'm sure you can still see oysters on the menu all over Florida, but understanding that their value transcends their culinary importance it's time. And relating all of that to what is happening to the planet as a whole, the carbon cycle, climate change, and what we individually and collectively can do to turn things around. We're witnessing bad news for creatures in the Arctic and in the Antarctic. Bad news for them translates to bad news for us. And of course, forests on the land are in trouble because of warming, but these forests of coral are dying because of a warming ocean. If we didn't know we have a problem, again, that would be a problem. But we know the connection between what we're putting into the sky, what we're taking out of the ocean. We can see it. The knowledge is there. What we need is to act on that knowledge. Now, those of us who've gotten acquainted with some of our creatures, fellow vertebrates in the ocean, the fish, in ways other than swimming with lemon slices and butter, know that there's more to a fish than just yum, yum, delicious. They have personality, they have faces. They're part of the carbon cycle, part of the nutrient cycle. And my favorite fish, if I have to choose one, other than just saying my favorite fish is a live fish, is a Nassau Grouper, now protected in Florida, along with the Goliath Grouper. Why do they have to be actively protected? Because we took so many of them so fast that they were almost going to disappear. And even the pink conch, almost gone, now protected. Can't we understand their value and not let them get to the point of almost no return? The sharks, again, we're seeing them with new eyes, the biggest fish in the sea. I did not know that they were out there in the Gulf of Mexico until, I thought, in a way, that they're a little like dinosaurs. You had pictures of them, you had stories about them, but they didn't really exist until I had a chance to actually see a whale shark. First time was off the coast of Mexico. But when I really got a lift was 100 miles south of New Orleans, out in the open ocean, near one of these salty mountains that come up to within about 300 feet of the surface, a place that fishermen know about, and so do the fish. Whale sharks go there to feed on the eggs of spawning bonita. And when I heard that they gather out there, I thought, yeah, right. But we went out anyway, hoping that we might, by some miracle, encounter them. Just try to imagine waking up 5 o'clock in the morning in your little boat 100 miles offshore over this seamount in the Gulf of Mexico, and the boat is being bumped, bump, bump, bump. Whale sharks banging into the boat, not intentionally. They were feeding on the fish eggs. And an airplane flying overhead took a picture of us, and they counted 92 whale sharks in one frame. And we were right in the middle of the frame. And it wasn't just the whale sharks at the surface. You could dive down, and it was like whale sharks as far down as you could, and I could hold my breath anyway. So, Gulf of Mexico, I thought I knew the Gulf of Mexico growing up here, but there was this amazing phenomenon that probably has been going on for tens of thousands of years. And just being introduced to my backyard, getting introduced to the creatures who live here on their own terms, not just on a hook or on a plate. I hope that if you haven't already taken the plunge and, go to an aquarium. That's another good place if they do it right. And some of the aquariums, I think the Florida Aquarium is one of the better ones. And, we are beginning to respect the creatures in the sea for reasons that we didn't know why we should care until fairly recently. Our predecessors, again, thinking about these creatures, I met them when I was a kid as a Jersey girl on the Jersey coast. I just thought they were the most amazing creatures, the way little kids love dinosaurs. I love horseshoe crabs. And then I came to Florida, and Florida had horseshoe crabs. I felt at home all at once. Their history precedes that of sharks. And knowing that they're still with us is something of a miracle. They have survived through periods of mass extinction. Ice ages have come, ice ages have gone, and these guys are still around. The scary thought is, on our watch, they may disappear because of what we're doing to the chemistry of the ocean, to their habitats on the beaches. We can't let that happen. We have to respect these amazing beings. There are only 4 species. This is one of 4. The other 3 are almost gone in their Asian homes in China and Taiwan. So, we can say, oh, the dodo, great bird. Wasn't he magnificent, but we'll never get to know one. We have the power to save creatures at this point in history that will never come again. Why? The next 10 years could be the most important in the next 10,000 years because of what we do or what we fail to do. I sat with this bird that nests out on Midway Island, halfway across the Pacific. There are birds here in Florida, too, if we but knew them, that live a long time and go back to the same place, like eagles have the same nest, the same mate, year after year, through life. And this is a bird who was tagged about the same time I was learning to dive. She was learning to fly. And we have been witnesses in a parallel part of the planet, she flying over thousands of miles of open ocean as a witness, seeing plastics for the first time, seeing these big boats that now steam across the Pacific. It didn't exist when she was a young bird. And plastics, oh my goodness. Now birds are stuffed with plastic. They think it's something to eat. They bring it back and give it to their babies. It happens here in Florida, happening all over the world. Somehow, this bird, named Wisdom by the people who've gotten to know her, she miraculously continues to foster baby chicks, and yes, somehow she is not immune. She feeds these cigarette lighters and toy soldiers and toothbrushes and other bits of our debris to her chicks, but most of them over the last few years that she's been witnessed, they have survived. She has actually every year laid 1 egg. She and her mate go out and bring food back and plastics back. Many of the little birds out there don't make it, but enough do so that the populations, again, from going through a tight spot, have now begun to rebound. But one of their biggest problems is not because we're out there killing them directly, it's because we are destroying the world in which they live. So, I couldn't help but wonder what the next 10 years will be for not just the fish, the birds, but of course for us. And it's been my privilege to not just work with kids, but to work with big kids who started out as kids, like George W. Bush, who married well, Laura, who went to Midway Island, met Wisdom, was motivated to try to do something about the problem of all the plastic that's out there, about the problems she heard about. There are solutions. And I credit her, as well as with a lot of other caring people, but she had a little more influence than most of us in terms of convincing George W. Bush to sign into law using that wonderful piece of legislation called the Antiquities Act, now under threat, but nonetheless very useful for Teddy Roosevelt and presidents throughout the history of our country, once it came into being early in the 20th century, for embracing wild places and giving them protection, care, mostly on the land. Most of our national parks, many of the big ones in the West, were established, started as national monuments. So here's George W. Bush signing what at the time was the biggest protected area in the country, bigger than all the national parks, making the Papahanaumokuakea Marine Reserve around the northwestern Hawaiian Islands, where monk seals, albatrosses, and other wildlife, sharks, tunas are still prospering, healthy coral reefs. And fast forward to 2016, when President Obama quadrupled the size. George W. Bush went out 50 miles. What Obama did was to go out to the full edge of the exclusive economic zone. Not everybody appreciates that countries with a coast can claim as part of their jurisdiction out 200 miles. And that hasn't always been the case, but it is the case presently, respected by nations around the world, leaving half of the world, the high seas, beyond the jurisdiction of any nation, or really all nations, through mandates of the United Nations. This year, 2020, is really important for a lot of reasons. We're at the edge. Will there or will there not be sharks? Will there or will there not be bluefin tuna? Will there, half the coral reefs are gone. They will either persist or not, depending on what we do or what we fail to do. Will Goliath grouper come back to the abundance or other things? It depends on us. Curiously, we have this power, this superpower of choice. And with the high seas, it means people around the world have a chance right now to come together and say, look, we don't really need to take fish on an industrial scale from the high seas. It doesn't go to feed starving people. It doesn't go to feed families or communities. It goes to feed bank accounts of major corporations that send fleets out into the open sea, where we could not go until about, seriously starting in the 1960s and 70s. It's not that we're dependent on what gets caught out there, but we need that to be a safe haven for life in the ocean. It will mean that fishermen in the nearshore waters have a better chance of getting things like tuna and swordfish if we give a safe haven for the high seas beyond our coastal waters. We have a choice this year to do that or not do that. The same thing about mining the deep sea. It's up for grabs right now. And so when I say people are, woe is me, I don't know what I can do. Problems are so big and I could fall into despair myself. But when you think about the opportunities that are right now in front of us, the choices that we can make, and I'm encouraged because I come here to Sanibel and I see the choices you are making, and it echoes with having individuals with power like George W. Bush, like President Obama, like the president of the little island of Palau, where 80% of the exclusive economic zone is protected, even the sharks are safe, and going to Chile, where 40% of the exclusive economic zone has been protected by the current president and the preceding president, and he was the preceding president. He's been president twice. There was a gap, but he came back. This is President Piñera. He's a diver. He's a skydiver as well as a scuba diver and a pilot. He's many things to many people, but for the fish, he's a champion because he understands that we have to protect. If you want to have fish on your plate, you've got to protect the source. And that means you cannot take them everywhere all the time in any numbers, which has been our habit throughout most of our history. And now we have a chance to turn it around. So, here in Florida, just a few weeks ago, we declared the hope spot for the Florida Gulf Coast, and you're in this game. We got the mayor, we got the city manager, mostly we got an enthusiastic, committed public who went a little overboard in some ways, but we got the kids, most of all. And I wonder if this is going to play. It was just exhilarating. You know, that's a plastic adorned ribbon that we were slicing. And the kids were just so magnificent, weighing in. Ask a 10-year-old, and think of your own 10-year-old self. What do you know about the ocean? Amazing. Even those who never see the ocean, now, through the means we have to communicate the nature of the world more widely, are aware that sharks exist and they're not bad guys. They're good guys. And this is our secret weapon. This is Shannon the shark, our Mission Blue ambassador, who talks to kids and asks questions and then shares on Facebook and elsewhere. One of the things that the little venture that we started called Mission Blue that gave rise to establishing a network of hope spots around the world, building on the concept of marine sanctuaries, building on the concept of parks, protected places, building on the concept that if you engage people who know and who care and who are willing to commit to doing something to improve a place they know and care about, even if we don't yet have laws, you can make things better than they otherwise would be. Hope spots, to go from places that are degraded one way or the other to get them into a better place, a network of hope. And now around the world, there are about 130 places. Next week, I'm going to the Seychelles because that, again, with an enlightened president, in fact, two, the present and the past president, really see what's happened in their lifetime. They want to do what they can using their power, but also because the people want it to happen. If the people aren't on board, you can make the laws, but people won't really pay attention to them. And so the idea, the hope, I hope it's going to work, is to have the voices of those who really do want to see the next 10 years be a turning point. We have the power to do that. Some of these hope spots. So what can you do? You can go to the Mission Blue website and you can see the videos. You can see a video of me swimming in the trash, or me and some of the other Mission Bluers out in the midst of a food chain in action, or with the whale sharks by the dozens. And to, I hope, feel your own power that obviously in this community, more than most that I get to see, you are already on the case. You are turning things from a time that, you could see it coming. When Cape Coral first got going, a lot of people said, oh no, and yet, it happened. But enough of the integrity of the wild places remained, so you had something to start with, thanks to people who said, we're going to embrace this place and keep it safe. Safe havens for wildlife mean it's a step in the right direction, an insurance policy for ourselves as well. So for me to come here is a privilege, and I'd like to be able to tell your story and share what you are doing to places around the world. It's a good news story, what's happening here. And, with what started out as just a vision with hope spots 10 years ago is developing into a real force in a way. We've got a company called Esri that does software to enable governments and communities, whoever it is, and now working with Hope Spots to take information. It's GIS, the Global Information System, layering of data. So you can gather, okay, so where are healthy places? Where do the oysters, where do the turtles come ashore? And how many are there? And what do they look like? Can we put all this into a database that now, with the technology that exists, you can share? If you have a framework where anybody can put their images, anyone could put their data into a place that characterizes a hope spot, and do this consistently around the world, that people can tune in to data and images and stories about what you're doing here. And you can likewise go over to the Seychelles, or, you know, it's hard to believe, but San Francisco Bay is a hope spot. Oh, do they ever need hope? But they're planting oysters. There's the Wild Oyster Project that in some ways echoes what you're doing here. Now, being able to know those people and share the stories and success or problems, it is another way to build this, what I hope will be not just hope, but a network of action. Thank you for letting me come here and share my sea stories with you. Thank you.
Thank you all so much. Thank you to Sylvia for being such an inspiration for so many. Thank you again to the Bowler family for making this happen. Let's take her advice and go out and push in our networks what we can do. Thank you so much. Good evening.